Welcome everyone to AURI Connect's Webinar Wednesday, part of AURI Connect's monthly online series featuring updates on the work that AURI is doing to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products. I'm Dan Scogan, the AURI Director of Government and Industry Relations, and your host on Webinar Wednesdays. The AURI Connects program is hosted by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute in Minnesota. This program aims to actively engage all participants in the food and ag industry to improve competitiveness on producers, businesses, and entrepreneurs through ongoing, purposeful connection of resources and partners along the value chain, and increased knowledge of opportunities, technologies, and trends. Now remember, this event is being recorded and archived and can be found at auri.org. Also remember that you will be muted during our presentations, but you can send us your written questions through the Q&A portal on your screen. AURI cultivates relationships with a wide array of stakeholders on a regular basis, and every other year we do a deeper dive with these valued partners. This is done in-person interviews, and it helps inform AURI on potential programming with clients, initiatives that AURI would want to pursue, and input into the AURI strategic plan. As you might expect, the COVID pandemic put new strains on businesses, and some of those challenges became very clear during our stakeholder interviews early in 2021. Today, we'll be reviewing findings from the 2021 stakeholder analysis. Then we'll hear from a couple of panelists who will discuss their industry's reaction to COVID. And finally, DEED Commissioner Steve Grove will share how DEED reacted to the last year and a half and what kind of programs and processes have opened up for businesses as they start to come out of the pandemic. So let's get that conversation started today with the overview from Dr. Linda Thompson. Dr. Thompson is AURI's Director of Organizational Advancement, where she leads culture and organizational development strategies, including staff and board development, staff recruitment and hiring, HR development, systems, and policy. She also plays a large role in our stakeholder analysis dissemination. So Dr. Linda Thompson, good afternoon and welcome to Webinar Wednesday.
Thank you, Dan, very much. Thank you for that warm welcome. Welcome everybody to today's webinar. In this presentation, I'll give you a brief, succinct overview of the 2021 themes from the stakeholder data that will really lay that context for our panel discussions. Next slide. Over the last 15 years, AURI has conducted biannual unstructured interviews with two participant groups, ag and food and general stakeholders. Examples of participants in the ag and food stakeholder group are from crop and livestock producers, statewide farm organizations, ag advocates, producer groups, and commodity councils. In the general stakeholders, those in the wider ecosystem, examples are development commissions, funders, universities and colleges, food industries, financial organizations, Minnesota's agencies, and legislators. This year, there was 115 participants in the poll. Out of that, 69 took our offer and wanted to do interviews with us. We conducted those interviews mostly virtually between January and April of 2021. Of the 69 that who we connected with and conducted the interviews, 37 were food and ag stakeholders and 32 were from the general group. For the food and ag stakeholders, we did ask one quantitative question, which we asked them what they felt was the state of ag in Minnesota on a rating scale. And we came out with about 68% positivity. Next slide. So just briefly discussing the distillation process that we use. I'll go through all the data, code it, which resulted in 1,800 different codes. We reduced that down into 200 different categories and reduced that down into 11 sub-themes. From those sub-themes, an ag and food theme emerged, as did a general theme. So two themes, and those two themes were distilled down into an overall theme. Next slide. So the food and ag stakeholders talked about resiliency. The majority experienced successes and growth with a lot of new intersections, collaborations, accentuated pluralism, which means both diversity and inclusivity, environmental sustainability, and there were several gaps that were illuminated. In the general stakeholders, there was a lot of discussion about the future, and already the future beginning with local and regional food, audience and value chain expansions, elevating diversity, equity, and inclusion, the virtual connections, and they talked about their pervading issues as well. Those two themes then boiled down into an overall theme for the study this biannual time. The paradigm shifts to people and the planet, leading to profitability while navigating pervasive tensions. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about the four major sub-themes that came out of this and the perspectives from each of the two stakeholder groups. Those themes are widening perspectives, forward-looking, relationships and collaborations, and the gaps. One of the things you may note as I go through the data is that there's a lot of repeated areas in the two different state groups. And that is interesting because it's the first time those ideas have kind of congealed. So it's very interesting to be on this side of doing the research to see all the amazing new things cropping up in our ecosystem. Next slide, please. So in widening perspectives, the ag and food stakeholders talked about, they had a fresh and a really openness and a new way of doing and approaching innovation. They talked about e-commerce and the really the magnification that caused. They also talked about the leveraging resources, their collaborations, talked about the virtual and how that really expanded their productivity. They found greater degrees of productivity and their reach. They also, their outcomes, some people made standardizations for our organic benchmarks. An ag economic study was done. Our on-farm research is being conducted. Program and product developments, there were several of those, local and regional foods. And they're finding strategies to help to address the hunger problems in Minnesota. The advocacy continues for broadband and childcare. New advocacy strategies are in place and being done for climate change, plurality, and then environmental sustainability. Next slide. In the general stakeholders, they talked a lot about adaptability and flexibility, which led to productive virtual relationships and hybrid working post-pandemic. They talked about their surprise of how that worked so well and their interest in continuing that because it just opens up such new territory. So they talked a lot too about e-commerce, artificial intelligence, and consumer collaborations. This flexibility, they're saying we need a lot of out-of-the-box thinking across many, many groups. Training opportunities emerged to address the talent gaps which are significant. And then audiences are expanding. Along with that, new foods and eating trends are emerging. Next slide. In the forward-looking theme, the ag and food group talked about emerging technologies. Artificial intelligence, robotics are emerging and proving very, very valuable. Likewise, a biodiverse economy is emerging, which includes renewable energy and the associated technologies that go along with that. There's emerging opportunities in regional and local foods. There's multiple types of protein, commodity diversification, cover crops, direct consumer marketing, and global marketing. And also dairy and hog farms are migrating back into the Northwest again, which really the Northwest stakeholders were very thrilled about that. Next slide. And forward looking for the general stakeholders, common goals were around clean and renewable fuel, electrification, cover crops, hemp, climate change, soil health, land restoration, and potentially carbon markets. The other common notable item was they noted how food and ag is becoming a vast field and that more and more people are very interested in that. So optimism prevails. Many of the businesses and the membership stabilized or grew. And then similar to the ag and food stakeholders in the emerging tech was anaerobic digestion, robotics, green hydrogen, plant proteins, natural peat products, greenhouses, and cover crops. Next slide. The next theme was relationships and collaborations. And in the ag and food stakeholders said that they were forced to see differently, and which really compelled these new relationships and collaborations. And they were very surprised at what that did for them, which was really inspiring to listen to these stories. There was a rise in convening and connecting and networking and identifying and building these diverse collaborations. Ag is becoming much more inclusive and racially equitable. And the key to everything, I feels like every time we do the stakeholder analysis, this one is a pervasive and perennial one, which relationships are central to everything, and they certainly are the key to innovation. Next slide. The general stakeholders carried on that theme, just saying relationships continue to flourish and build, and inclusive communities seek expansion, and they're strengthening and doing everything they can to strengthen the ag and entrepreneurship. There's a high awareness of racial justice, supporting BIPOC farmers and helping those who really fell through the cracks. They distributed government funds, realized some people really fell through the cracks, so they found some other funds to help them. They supported their hospitality area, and they also distributed funds to really help to spur innovation in their communities. Next slide. Moving into the gaps, in the ag and food stakeholders, they talked about their pervading issues, which is differing research points of view, competitive and shrinking commodities, and alternative proteins, which they said just needed to be navigated. It's just a common catalyst that just needs to be acknowledged and worked through. Also revealed were the supply chain gaps, bottlenecks, and broadband needs. Growth deterrents were centered on rising costs, the fear of inflation forthcoming, the policy pressures, those tight labor markets, and regulation lags. And again, what those people that fell through the cracks really did experience flat sales, diminished profits, closures, restructures, and all of that had some ripple effects, and it really did negatively impact some rural communities. Next slide. The general stakeholders talked about some varying gaps too. They talked about the struggles and these are the ongoing struggles in the rural area: childcare, workforce, available workforce, rising costs. Some new struggles were about cover crop commercialization. And they talked about misalignments between industry and higher education when it comes to the talent pool and successor preparation. They noticed that some stakeholders noticed that the food and ag career pipeline had gaps, and they had taken some steps to strengthen that. So other struggles were some businesses are struggling. There's a disheartened culture. There's delays and gaps in labor, and there's certainly meat processing gaps. Next slide. So the stakeholders talked about the AURI's role in the ecosystem, and they said that what we do is we frame and tell the food and ag story through a science lens, where we prove those breakthroughs and bring new value add concepts to the market. We also act as a bridge for farmers and urban consumers, support the ecosystem development and connectedness, and convene and amplify the food and ag industry ecosystem. Next slide. just to give you a little view of how things have evolved over the course of the last 4 data sets, I thought it might be interesting just to talk briefly about how that has evolved and watch that growth. So in terms of conditions in 2015, the stakeholders talk about cost, customers, policies. The next round, they talk about quality of life and prosperity. Then they start to talk about the changing ecosystems. You can see it moving. And then in 2021, there was a paradigm shift, just a complete different way of seeing collaborations and pluralism and environmental sustainability. And moving to mindset in 2015, they were really perplexed with the whole environment, what it was, not even seeing a solution. In the next round, they said, hey, we're faced with these challenges when we have wide missions, low budgets, and narrow talent pools. And in the next round, they're like complexities rising, competition's really coming forth. We're not certain about anything. And yet, and then 2021, they really proved resilient and adaptable and became very open and welcoming the unknown. Next slide. In terms of evolution, in 2015, there were talks, and we were proud of incremental improvements. And then in 2017, they're going, there are some enhancements here. We're broadening our perspectives. In 2019, they're like, hey, yeah, there's rise in ag value chain opportunities. And then in 2021, it was this bursting forth of these new innovations and intersections that led to the expansion. And then in innovation, it began with expanding markets and some diversification, and then it moved into the reinvigorating and rethinking some things, which then moved into emerging innovations and some more expansions. And then we come to 2021 with once again, it kind of bursts forth with some really absolute tactile things, local regional foods, multiple kinds of protein, commodity, cover crops, alternative energy, on and on. So in essence, next slide, it kind of leads into the overarching theme. There was a paradigm shift. So the paradigm shifts to people and planet, leading to profitability while navigating pervasive tensions. So it was really an honor to be able to present to you this data set from the 2021. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dan.
All right, Dr. Thompson, thanks very much for giving us an overview of the data that was gathered in 2021 as we did our stakeholder analysis once again. Now let's hear from a couple who were caught in the middle of the COVID storm and how they survived or how they pivoted. Our first presenter today is going to be Chad Friezy. He is General Manager of Chippewa Valley Ethanol Company. Chad is an experienced commodity manager and leader with a demonstrated history of working in the renewables and environment industry. Chad Friezy, welcome to Webinar Wednesday.
Thank you, Dan. So we were asked to kind of take a look at a few different things. Mostly the sort of the focus over the last couple of years and the impacts of the business. CVEC as a co-op, over the last couple of years, I mean, we had to make some tough decisions. Initially, in early 2020, we had to decide whether we were an essential business or not. And if we were, how were we going to safely navigate this market with COVID and some of the issues that were being brought for that? So, what was the market going to look like, and could we be successful and safe in that market? So we took an approach where we utilized the diversity that we've had in place and worked on throughout the years to shift our markets, limit our risks, and focus our energies on the best markets that were available to us for 2020. And this really meant shutting down our core business, the fuel ethanol side, and focusing on disinfectants, cleaning products, and other things used in kind of the COVID process and where the consumer was at that point in time. But even though we'd had that diversity for a long time, we'd never taken that approach. Without driving demand, everybody being shuttered in, it was a huge shift in market. So, the other things we were asked was, what did we need to shift? What processes did we change? Well, that was one of the big ones, but the other one was really in communication and and the platforms we were using for that type of thing. So our business is very kind of hands-on. We've got groups of people working together in close proximity, so we needed to make social distance kind of a priority. We needed to re-educate staff based on some of the things we were hearing from Minnesota Department of Health and other areas, so that we could have safe protocols in place and keep the workforce, healthy. So we set and adjusted our business model based on what we were seeing in the market. We did that education, we made those changes, and then we started to utilize a lot more different platforms, video conferencing, Zooms, all those types of things. We were doing conference calls as a replacement to management meetings that we would normally have in person, just to kind of create good protocols in the workplace. Another question that was kind of asked for us is, what are the things that sort of happened are we going to probably continue with? And I think that's also one of the areas we'll continue with. We saw benefit in, better social distancing with regard to cold, flu, COVID. We've got our workers spread out a little bit. They could still communicate. We just ask them to not bunch up and be in tight groups and that type of thing. We'll utilize the electronic platforms, conference calls, video chats, those things, I think a lot more in the future, especially when you've got decisions that need to be made quickly. I think that platform and technology has really developed a lot in the last couple of years and will be utilized in the business model a lot going forward. Some of the challenges and successes that we had, obviously, challenges were, assessing the market, what was the outlook, everything was changing so quickly. Safety was a huge challenge and making those adaptations, excuse me. That market, it challenged our diversity, and we're a company that, if you look at our newsletters over the last, 10 years, diversity is talked about a lot in there, adaptability and that type of thing. So the success really is that we were able to create a safe environment. We were able to adapt even beyond, I think, our internal expectations in that area, and I think a lot of that was just from, your rural economy. You've got good, strong workers, knowledgeable, experienced staff, and that definitely kind of helps. We're all team approach, and maintaining those communication platforms certainly helped with that as well. So having those available in the change. The themes that Linda talked about, I think from a business perspective, we're in very strong agreement with a lot of those themes and discussion points that Linda outlined. CVEX, we're diverse. We like that. We've been challenged and accentuated that strength, I think, in the last couple of years. Sustainably, efficiency, those are areas and measures that I think are key to our industry, and that ag focus. There was some themes in there about limited resources. We're in a renewable marketplace, and so access to those commodities and some of the things we need in the market have certainly been a challenge, especially over the last year or two, with transportation and just worker shortages in different areas. Companies that you relied on for certain assets or certain inputs being shut down because they weren't an essential business, or they didn't have those safety and social distancing pieces put in place quite properly. So we're a rural co-op. Relationships and community are highly valued for us. So that was definitely something that I saw lined out in the theme. Labor force is definitely some challenges, undefined policy directives, lack of long-term focus. I think we're starting to get there. We're starting to see some themes come through now. Demand reduction, shifts, those types of things. And finally, kind of some bright spots, I think, as we look forward. We will definitely be continuing to focus on diversity and opportunities around value add for ag commodities. Green, carbon, renewable products, those are all things that definitely are in our wheelhouse and we see as bright spots. And definitely continued relationship with AURI in utilization of ag products, and we've got a long-standing relationship with them, and definitely good around different resources and farm commodities. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Chad, for that overview and a little bit of a background on the transition that you had to make at Chippewa Valley Ethanol Company as the pandemic came and as you worked your way through it. Let's turn our attention next to Bob LaFave. Bob is the Vice President of Ag Affairs at Midwest Dairy Association, where he is responsible for developing a strategy for how they work with the dairy community, including farmers, cooperatives, processors, and other checkoff organizations. Bob also leads Midwest Dairy's product and food safety research at the Midwest Dairy Foods Research Center. Bob LaFave, good afternoon and welcome to Webinar Wednesday.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. And I also appreciate what Linda had shared earlier. I mean, really everything that she shared is definitely the themes that's been happening within the dairy industry. And Chad said it well. I mean, everything. I could really, the pandemic really created a massive shift within the entire food supply chain. Dairy certainly was not immune to that. And that massive shift, because, with the majority of people eating out of home to the majority, if not all of people eating in home, right? So food service shut down and that transition to retail and the expansion of e-commerce. I mean, dairy basically didn't exist in e-commerce, a very small portion. And the last couple of years, e-commerce all of a sudden figured out dairy is a profit center for them, which has definitely helped us without a doubt. But through that whole time frame, with the shift, I mean, from a farm gate level, we saw immediate price drops, and then a huge swing up. In part because of the government food box programs and everything that was happening, whether that was good or bad. But I mean, man, we saw huge swings in what was happening in price. And the resiliency and the adaptability of the supply chain, though, to really refocus their attention. And now, certainly as food service it continues to open up, what we've seen is this resiliency and adaptability within the industry has created additional innovation. So much so, I mean, milk has been around for tens of thousands of years. And now we're just decoding all the properties, the DNA of milk. And that innovation, and I mean, it's an extremely functional food product. I could keep going on and on, Dan, but I'm going to stop here. And I know you have some questions for us, and I'd love to, to dive in deeper.
Well, I appreciate that, Bob. And yeah, we are going to come back to you as we hear from Commissioner Grove next, and then we'll come back to you as we continue this discussion and try to pick up some questions. I see some starting to come into our Q&A portal. And if you have a question for any of our presenters today, we certainly encourage you to write it in the Q&A portal, and we'll try to get our guests to answer it. So that was more of a perspective of what an industry was doing. As we heard, our first presenter today was more on a individual business. And now Bob, with his perspective on what the industry was doing as COVID came and as we worked our way through it. And one of the state agencies that really found themselves, I think, with a lot of moving parts was the Department of Employment and Economic Development. And we are very pleased today to welcome Steve Grove, the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, or DEED. Under Commissioner Grove, the department works to grow the state's workforce, close opportunity gaps, and provide businesses and startups the support that they need to grow and thrive in Minnesota's economy. And that certainly was an additional challenge the last 18 months. But Commissioner Grove, welcome to Webinar Wednesday.
Thanks, Dan. Hello, everybody. It's good to be here with you. Great to hear from the distinguished leaders here and to be in touch with such a great organization in AURI for our state. We are very, very lucky for Dan's leadership, for the work of the AURI across a whole host of efforts. I know the governor has frequently come to your seminars and events. We here at DEED have long been supporters, and the kind of innovation and commercialization that you help foster in our agricultural and food industry is just really critical, especially now, given all the changes the pandemic has brought to all of us that you've just heard over the beginning of this conversation. You know, our agency, DEED, that I lead for the governor is the Department of Employment and Economic Development, as Dan said. And really our mission is simple, is to empower the growth of the Minnesota economy for everyone. And kind of unique to Minnesota, it includes both economic development and workforce development. So kind of both sides of that coin of how you feed an economy with great workers and talented workforce, but also create new businesses, new opportunities, new growth, stay on the cutting edge in terms of the kind of business growth you see in the state. So we think it works together quite nicely. And of course, we've been challenged in some really unique ways over the last few years to make sure we're doing right by this economy and by its businesses and workers. You know, clearly the very first, area of focus we had when the pandemic struck and you had 416,000 jobs lost in 1 month back in April of 2020 was to get unemployment insurance to everybody in the state who needed it. And that effort in and of itself has just been a gargantuan task for DEED, and one that has led to about 1 in 5 Minnesotans receiving an unemployment insurance check over the past 2 years roughly. So that has been a major focus of ours. We feel very fortunate to have a long-standing and strong program here in Minnesota that was able to deliver. We were the first state in the country to institute all 3 federal programs, and it's the kind of safety net that we're very fortunate to have in this country, and that really was tested and brought to the brink during the pandemic. Of course, we spent a lot of the last, year and a half, 2 years in reactive mode, right? Trying to react to the pandemic. We set up small business support funds and small business lotteries, and worked really close with the SBA on loans, and put about half a billion dollars into the marketplace to help sustain small businesses at a really tricky time. Many of them startups, many of them in the ag space. And this was critical to weather that initial storm. We are not yet out of the storm, there's no question, but we are in a new chapter of this story we're all writing as we go here. And, our shift now has moved really from trying to shift from the reactive to the very necessary plugging of holes and supporting of small businesses and the challenges they face along with workers, into the more proactive. It doesn't mean we don't still need to help those who are suffering from the challenges of COVID and the economy, but we have a pretty unprecedented opportunity, especially after the news that just came yesterday of a $7.75 billion surplus in Minnesota, to really define this next chapter of Minnesota's economy for where we're headed. And I'll tell you, as we've had discussions around that with the governor, with our cabinet, and we prepare for the governor's budget announcement in late January of how he wants to chart the course for how that money is smartly invested, a lot of really key themes have come up. And one of the big ones is innovation in our ecosystem and innovation in our economy. And I think AURI is at the cutting edge of that. We need to have more small businesses, more startups growing and succeeding in the state than we ever have before. That's going to be the key to making sure the next Fortune 500s grow here versus elsewhere. And at a time when labor is mobile, capital is mobile, everyone's rethinking the economy and their role in it, we are in a very competitive landscape. And we're fortunate to be starting from a very strong position in Minnesota. We have long been a state that has a lot to boast when it comes to our economy and its growth, but we are taking nothing for granted. And especially given so many variables are shifting in our economy right now, we've got to be in an assertive orientation. So we're really looking at entrepreneurship and small business as just a major focus of how we should invest our dollars. The second more broadly important theme is just workforce. I mean, we face some pretty stunning workforce shortages in Minnesota, some of the biggest gaps we've seen in workforce for our lifetimes, huge job vacancies, a tighter labor market, frankly, than other states have. And there are demographic things at play. There's a pandemic at play. There's some really structural issues at play in terms of childcare availability and training and other things. But we have to take a holistic approach to that issue. So we are revamping completely how our agency does workforce development. It's hard to change in government, but I tell you, we're doing it. And it's not the only way we're going to get through this challenge, but it's something that you should expect of our agency at a time when we're facing such a focused challenge in the workforce space. And then I would say, lastly, this is a time when we realize in government more than ever, and especially in an agency like DEED, that we have to focus on partnerships. Government is not going to solve economic growth by any stretch. It never has. It's the businesses and the leaders and the innovators in our economy and the workers who do that. So how can DEED better partner through our funding streams, through our programs, with organizations like AUI, with others who are doing phenomenal work in the community to really build this next chapter of our economy that makes Minnesota a much stronger state than it was before, is just central to what we're doing. And I think, implicit in that and of everything of what I just said, but always worth highlighting, is this issue of equity. We have seen our disparities in Minnesota's economy laid bare for the entire world over the last couple of years, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, all that followed. And, it's uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable. And it's something that can be fixed. There are solutions out there to make a more equitable economy. We need more people of color starting businesses. We need more people of color getting great educations and getting help and support into family sustaining wage jobs. And at a time when there's so much malleability in the economy, so much that's changing, so much that is requiring innovation, this is an area first and foremost we need to innovate in, and in a set of principles and programs, I think, really that we can use to shift where Minnesota's economy heads. And since Minnesota's labor force is growing by leaps and bounds in the coming years, and 70% of that growth will be people of color, this is not just a moral imperative, it's an economic one. So we're excited about our economy and where it's headed. We're excited to partner with organizations like AURI on it. Would love to have more of a dialogue here and hear your questions and discussions, but wanted to tee off there to get us started. And thanks for having me today. This is a great forum.
Thank you, Commissioner Grove. It's great to have you here, and great comments, I guess. I'm going to start my first question coming back to you as we do a little bit of a round robin with all of our guests today. But it just seemed like every other day, DEED or the Department of Ag or Small Business Association were coming out with another program, especially during the ramp up of COVID. And, we were trying to track all that and trying to get the right information to the entrepreneurs and small business people. When you think about all those different pieces that were brought forward, are you seeing one or two that's going to stick, that's maybe going to stay with us even as we work our way out of COVID, that really seems to be a catalyst to help grow our economy and grow some of the workforce?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, when crisis hits and you have to innovate, you hope that it's not just temporary, that it can actually lead to longer standing changes. I'll tell you, one of them has been just the increased investments we've had in small business creation. The growth of our Launch Minnesota program, which puts early stage money into companies just getting off the ground, I think is essential. We've seen 40% more business starts in the last year than we've seen in previous years. So in these frothy times when there's disruption and new opportunity, people start stuff. And so we have to be, as a state government, supportive of that and encouraging of that. The other I'd just say is our workforce system. We all know, everyone here will tell you, workforce shortages are one of the most pressing challenges our state faces. And we sit on top of a system that was really built for kind of a late 80s, early 90s workforce. We are very different here in 2021, and there hasn't been a lot of meaningful reform in that system for a very long time. So we have looked to both reform how we fund workforce, to reform how we deliver it. We had a very brick and mortar system before, where we kind of sat around and waited for people to walk in the front door of a workforce center for us to give them services. Nothing wrong with in-person services, but boy, I tell you, as everyone here knows, and as we're doing right now, we live in a virtual world now. So how do we deliver those services more effectively from a digital standpoint? And how do we get out into the community more? Because businesses need us on their behalf out there drawing bridges to communities. So we've really, that's kind of service delivery piece, Dan, that we had to shift in the pandemic. We hope sticks. You know, we were kind of contemplating some of these changes before the pandemic. And I think like a lot of organizations, the pandemic hit, it accelerated all these trends. And then it gave people this kind of golden opportunity to capitalize on that momentum to really make longer term changes. So we certainly hope people hold Deed accountable to that, because it's where we need to head.
Bob, I saw you concurring with the commissioner's comments about workforce development. Is that one of the ones that keeps you up at night in the dairy industry?
Oh, well, absolutely. Everyone from, you know, the farmers that are producing the milk, all the way through the entire supply chain. What we've seen is a shift to much more, I'll call it workplace flexibility. You know, our plants, you still have to, you know, make that milk into cheese, right? That's mainly what we do here in Minnesota, is make that milk into cheese. And talking with our co-ops and processors, they have had to continue to ramp up the flexibility in their workforce to keep their plants operating at maximum efficiency. And, you know, our dairy farmers have always had labor challenges. I mean, we've had some, you know, the immigration reform that's needed to happen for the last 15, 20 years still hasn't happened. And that could be one solution. It's not the only solution, but certainly a solution, and in particular with dairy on the farm, because there is no visa that actually would allow for someone to milk cows come here from a different country. That's just one example. So yeah, we're seeing that, but you know, tip of the cap again, back to the industry for their resilience, their adaptability. And this is just one example, right? The workforce, and to be flexible, shorter shifts in the plants, shift changes. It's amazing. I mean, I'm actually humbled just to see how, you know, the food and industry is able to adapt.
How about Chad? How about CVEC, work shortage or workforce development, an issue for you guys? You might be on mute yet, Chad. There you
How's
go.
that? Certainly in rural environments, you know, finding labor is a challenge. You know, we haven't had lots of turnover, but I think, you know, ourselves and probably, you know, the ethanol industry as a whole, finding qualified people is definitely a challenge, continues to be. And, you know, I think we all need to become more adept at sort of an internal training process, finding people with strong skills and focusing on the skills, not the knowledge, because we can bring them the knowledge through the industry. So,
Commissioner, you know, we got 4 organizations here today that survived the pandemic. They're going to come out of the other end looking fine and maybe working a little differently. But we know that there were some that did not survive. And small businesses, even employees at certain companies maybe didn't get it called back. What are you hearing from them? Are they becoming more entrepreneurial? Are they looking for opportunities to maybe move in a different direction? What is your staff and the department seeing or hearing?
Yeah, Dan. Well, you know, an economy obviously it's a dynamic thing in any time, but boy, in a pandemic, it sure is extra dynamic. And there are many businesses who didn't survive the pandemic. I think, you know, no surprise to anyone here, a lot of those businesses were in hospitality and in tourism. It was just a devastating year for those businesses. And those are already high turnover businesses to begin with, restaurants and the like. We all know that about 1 in 10 succeed. But the pandemic made that a lot harder. So we've seen people kind of reshift and rename and refigure their configurations. I do think the PPP dollars and the state dollars helped many survive that wouldn't have otherwise been able to do it. But, you know, this is a creative economy we have here in Minnesota. People have found new businesses to pursue. And I think that's why you see that kind of 40% uptick in small business starts. It's both opportunity because there's disruption and people are innovative and find angles. It's also desperation and the need to do it to survive. And so The increase in sole proprietorships is strong. People striking out on their own. You know, this has been a state that has long been a great spot to start a business. We have the best 5-year business survivability of any state in the country. If you start a business here, more likely to be around 5 years from now than any other state in the country. But where we kind of don't do as well is the new starts. We're kind of in the low 40s for the number of people that start stuff. And so, you know, at a time when there's so much dynamicism, we're trying to get more people encouraged to start things and to create the support structures that make that a little bit less risky. So it is challenging. People have had to shut down and restart and reimagine. But we do have a pretty resilient economy here. And I've, you know, echoing the comments that Bob made a moment ago, I've just been really impressed by the business leaders and entrepreneurs in our state for navigating this moment. It's been really hellacious for so many. And I think many have come out strong. And the most recent data from our stock market and certainly from the surplus news of yesterday shows that our economy has weathered this pretty well on the whole. Now it's a matter of what do we want this next chapter to look like and how can we make it better for everybody?
And those comments piggyback on the question we have from one of our participants today. Any thoughts on the potential impact of increased private equity capital on food and ag in Minnesota? And I'll leave that up to any of you to challenge or to pick that up and try to answer it. What are we seeing? Did the pandemic shake some money loose, or especially from private equity firms?
You know, I can answer a little bit towards that. You know, in specific markets, when you look at sustainability, carbon intensity, we're seeing a lot of private equity on the, you know, carbon capture and some of those things trying to come into the market. You know, I think we need continued political support on those programs to maintain that, because these projects are going to take, you know, 3, 5, 7 years to really develop. And so we've got to maintain, you know, kind of a political presence that sets a direction and a focus to keep that capital, you know, engaged and invested. And I think all flows back very well to the ag economy, soil, carbon capture, all those types of things, farming practices can all be a part of that carbon story. So.
Well, yeah, I think also, you know, Commissioner, I'm sure would agree. I mean, we're blessed actually with many food companies in Minnesota. I mean, we're a food and ag economy. And I think any opportunity we have to have more equity, private equity, whatever coming in and to drive more innovation within our food industry, I think it's welcomed. And, you know, to Chad's point, sustainability in the mind and the eyes of the consumer has only accelerated through this pandemic. And I think actually the dairy industry is well positioned. We've made our commitment to be carbon neutral or better by 2050, improve water quality, reduce or optimize water use. And the entire industry across the supply chain is embracing that. It's a little bit difficult. We're trying to figure it out. We don't have the carbon markets there for us yet. The eco markets, the ecosystems markets aren't quite there ready for us. It's the Wild West when it comes to that. And really, we have to make sure, though, in all of this whole idea of sustainability, that we don't leave our farmers behind in this, right? Because for them, first and foremost, it has to be profitability. People, planet, the impact we have to our local communities. But if you don't have profitability at the farm gate, you don't have any of that. And our economy as a result would suffer, in particular in Minnesota, because we are reliant on the food industry.
Well, I think I've heard an optimistic tone from Commissioner Grove today about the future here in Minnesota. So I'm going to circle back to Bob and Chad. And Bob, maybe start with you. As you think about the dairy industry and your role in it, optimistic, pessimistic, where are you at?
I'm optimistic because the cows that produce milk, it is an extremely functional food with 13 essential nutrients, right, Dan? I mean, it's, you know, and what we're seeing, I mean, our global markets continue to expand. We are exporting more today than we ever have, and that's despite the challenges we have with our ports. And so I think that says everything about dairy when we're able to expand our markets across the globe with the current situation we have, I'm optimistic.
Chad, what's your take on it?
From an ethanol industry, I am definitely optimistic. You know, as you look forward and where we're focusing things, sustainability, carbon, greenhouse, green, renewable, all those things are things you're hearing from consumers, market groups. You know, it's an ag industry, and we've been focused for decades now on becoming more efficient, more sustainable, more renewable, doing more with less, and that goes from, you know, at the pump, what that carbon intensity or energy unit is, all the way back to the farm, where they're doing more with less, getting more bushels on the same amount of land with less inputs, and utilizing the energy they've got there, soil, sun, and water, to make more and more production. So I'm definitely optimistic.
Typically, when we have roundtable discussions like this, you think of something that you didn't get a chance to say, and you want to say as you're getting back to your vehicle or something. So I'm going to go around the horn here, and we're going to wrap things up because we do have a hard stop here this afternoon. But Commissioner Grove, maybe we'll just start with you. Final thoughts on the department, the pandemic, where we're at, where we're going.
Well, thanks, Dan, and thanks for having me. What a great conversation. And Chad and Bob, it's an honor to be speaking with you. I'd like to pick up a little bit where Bob left off on this being a food and ag state. It really is. And I think when you take that, you combine it with our prowess in healthcare and in global wellness in general, you start to have this image of Minnesota as sort of a health and wellness capital, really, of the world. And you know, as a state that I think is often under examined, but punches way above its weight from an economic standpoint, we have to be ready to share that message with the rest of the country and the rest of the world. And we have really leaned forward in a deed on launching a new platform to do that. It's at joinusmn.com. It's a new economic development website, but really it's about telling the story of Minnesota's economy to the world. And it has a lot of great examples of food and ag companies who've made it big, and also the resources state government offers such efforts to grow if you're on the smaller side or coming into the market. We need to be a little less Minnesota humble right now. I know that's uncomfortable for some of us, but there's stiff competition out there, and you can count on your state government, and certainly this governor and myself, to be very bullish on Minnesota, both with our friends, but also with our competition, because we think these next few years of the global economy are really going to define the next 20 or 30, and we want to put Minnesota in a strong place. And I think that ag and health and health tech as this kind of wellness center of our state is a really key message that we need to carry globally. So thanks again for having me.
Thanks for being here. Chad, final thoughts from you.
I'm just, you know, it's been a rough couple of years. Some were more successful than others, but I think just the adaptability of the rural economies, the farm entities that were out there, and kind of seeing our way through this has been phenomenal. Truly appreciate AURI's work, you know, to develop new markets and allow that entrepreneurial spirit in that ag community to kind of continue to push forward, finding new products, finding new ways to add value. And so commend you guys on that, and thanks for having me on today.
Bob, you get the last word today.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I just want to say thank you to AURI. It's AURI and organizations like yours that will continue to be important, even more important as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you all. That concludes AURI Connect's Webinar Wednesday for today, and we do want to thank our presenters and our panelists as well. AURI Connect's Webinar Wednesday is presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. AURI's mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. We're interested in your feedback, so please respond when we send you our event evaluations. And remember, for more information on today's program or any of the work that AURI is involved with, you can go to auri.org. Please join us for the next AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday coming up on January 12th. We'll hear about AURI's 2021 Year in Review. Attendees will learn about many of the continuing efforts underway to foster long-term economic benefit through value-added agricultural products here in Minnesota. And you can always learn more about other work that AURI is involved with by going online, again at auri.org. We're looking forward to having you join us again January 12th for another AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday.